Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'd just like to say a very, very warm welcome to everyone in this cavernous room. I hope I'll be able to see everybody at the end of the table. The first annual meeting for myself of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Just to let everyone know, this is being live streamed. Can I invite as we open the meeting, all members and officers around the table to introduce themselves for the benefit of those who are watching the meeting live. So if I can start, I am Tracy Brabin, the Mayor of West Yorkshire.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Still, Managing Director of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Good morning, I'm Caroline Allen, Head of Legal and Governance at the Combined Authority.
Hello, I'm Susan Hinchcliffe, Leader of Bradford.
Good morning, I'm Roger Marsh, Chair of the Leeds City Region Enterprise Partnership.
Good morning, Councillor Tim Swift, Leader of Calderdale Council.
Councillor Stuart Galton, representing the Liberal Democrat groups of West Yorkshire.
Dave Pearson, Director of Transport Property Services at the Combined Authority.
Rebecca Poulson, Leader of the Conservative Group on Bradford Council.
Councillor Matthew Robinson, representing the Conservative groups in West Yorkshire.
Councillor Shabir Pando, Kirklees Council, Leader.
Councillor James Lewis, Leader of Leeds City Council.
Ruth Chaplin, Governance Services Officer, Combined Authority.
And moving on to my right.
Good morning, Peter Harron, Leeds City Council, representing Scrutiny.
Melanie Corcoran, Director of Delivery.
Alan Rees, Director of Strategy, Communications and Policing.
Angela Taylor, Director Corporate and Commercial Services, Combined Authority. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you all so much. And we have a couple of members of the press, I think, with us to the side on the side chairs. I'd just like to say a warm welcome to Councillor Matthew Robinson, his first, like myself, first attendance to this Combined Authority meeting. And also, if I could personally celebrate and congratulate Sir Roger Marsh on his knighthood. It is so well deserved, a real champion for our region. If I could also say just a couple of opening words. I was reflecting this morning on my journey from the council estate in Howden Clough in Birstall, about to chair my first ever Combined Authority meeting as the Mayor of West Yorkshire, the first West Yorkshire Mayor, the first woman Metro Mayor in the country. And it's my mission to make that opportunity available to all young people across West Yorkshire. And with that in mind, I want to thank everyone in this room who made devolution possible and got us to a point where we can now be in delivery mode, which is an exciting point to be. And if I could place on record my personal thanks to Councillor Hinchcliffe, the outgoing chair, and to all members of the Combined Authority for the significant achievements of the Combined Authority under her chairmanship, and not least securing the devolution deal that locked £1.8 billion worth of investment for West Yorkshire. We will use that wisely, and using your experience and my manifesto pledges, we will, I know, make a massive difference to the outcomes for the people of West Yorkshire. If I could just, for those who may not know, who may be watching on the live stream, just to reiterate my 10 manifesto pledges that gave us 60% of the vote, and quite a mandate from the public, creating 1,000 well-paid skilled jobs for young people, prioritising skills and training to ensure everyone in West Yorkshire has the skills they need to secure work, supporting local businesses, leaders and be a champion for our regional economy, not just locally or nationally, but internationally. Lead a creative new deal after 3 decades in the creative industries. You won't be surprised to know that, to ensure our creative industries are part of our broader recovery strategy. I will also appoint an inclusivity champion to ensure the region's recovery benefits us all, that we have a fair and just recovery from COVID. As my role as the Police and Crime Commissioner, I'll recruit 750 more frontline police officers and staff to fight crime, putting women and girls and the safety of women and girls at the heart of the policing plan. I've also committed to bring buses back into public control, introduce simpler fares, contactless ticketing and greener buses. And as someone who is a bus commuter, that could not come soon enough. I'm committed to building 5,000 sustainable homes, including council houses and affordable homes. And last but not least at all, tackle the climate emergency and protect our environment. So that's our mission, and I know that we're all of a mind to deliver that. Can I just, before we move on to the actual agendas, if I could just thank Leeds City Council for hosting this meeting and their staff and the Combined Authority staff for making these necessary arrangements. As you're all aware, we only have 90 minutes in this room, so we should be finished by 12:30 because of health and safety requirements. And so with that in mind, as we have a very large agenda, I'm going to be quite swift, getting us through the first half, hopefully then giving us appropriate time to discuss the more substantive items. So general housekeeping, the fire exits are clearly marked, and the muster point is outside Leeds Museum. And if I could ask if you could stay in your designated seats, please, during the meeting. And when not in your seat, please do wear a face mask. So if we could now go on to item 2, membership of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. This report notes the appointments of 5 West Yorkshire Constituent Council members, 3 political balance members, the member appointed by the non-constituent council and their substitutes, set out Appendix 1. It also notes my appointment of Councillor James Lewis as my deputy mayor, and I hope that the meeting will concur this is a fine appointment, and I'll look forward to working very closely with Councillor Lewis. The report also proposes the appointment of Roger Marsh as the LEP member of the Combined Authority and Mark Roberts as the substitute LEP member, and seeks approval for the proposed voting rights for the LEP member and City of York Council Combined Authority member as set out in the report. Can members please confirm their agreement to these recommendations set out in paragraph 10 of the report? It is quite tricky to see people at the end of the table, so if you do wish to speak, please do raise your hand, and then we can sort out the microphone situation. But are we happy to confirm these recommendations? Yes, Stuart.
Thanks. Do we call you mayor or chair? Just to clarify, that wasn't my question, but that's a preliminary.
I think chair is fine.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I've no objection to the appointments made here. I was just wondering at what point the Combined Authority would be informed of officially the appointment of the Deputy Mayor for Policing.
Thank you so much. That is actually coming as another item on the agenda. Alison Lowe did appear in front of the Police and Crime panel and was unanimously adopted and voted in. So we will get to that item on the agenda. Thank you so much, Stuart. Did anyone else have any further points? No, thank you. Right, let's move swiftly. Item 3, which is apologies. Ruth, would you mind confirming apologies?
We've had apologies from Councillor Lawson, but Councillor Golton is here. Councillor Denise Jeffrey, Councillor Andrew Waller and Councillor Kim Groves.
Thank you so much. And then item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest that they wish to declare in any item on the agenda. If I may just also mention that I will be declaring a disclosable pecuniary interest in agenda item 13. When we get to that item, I'll ask Councillor Lewis to take the chair, and we've agreed that rather than leave the room, I'll just stay in my place while Councillor Lewis takes the chair. So do any members have any interest they wish to declare? No, great. Thank you. Number 5, exclusion of press and public. Ruth, would you mind confirming no item on the agenda requiring the exclusion of the press and public?
That's correct, Chair, no items.
Super. Item 6, minutes of the April the 22nd, 2021. The minutes of the last meeting of the Combined Authority. Can those members who were present at the meeting confirm that was an accurate record, please? Thank you, Councillor Hinchcliffe. Thank you, Sir Roger Marsh. Thank you. Item 7, committee arrangements and appointments. So the purpose of this item is to establish the committee arrangements for the new municipal year and to seek approval. The proposals you will have read, were in the papers. Since the papers were published, there have been further updates, and I will just talk you through those updates if I may. So Kirklees have nominated Andrew Cooper from the Green Party to corporate scrutiny and Anthony Smith, Liberal Democrat, to transport scrutiny. There are changes of nominations from Leeds, Neil Walshaw to replace Kaylee Brooks on Climate, Energy and Environment Committee, and Kaylee Brooks to replace Neil Walshaw on Employment and Skills Committee. Also, there is an extra point not in the paper. It's also proposed that to secure private sector representation on the Leeds City Region Partnership Committee, that the LEP member, Sir Roger Marsh, and the chair of the York and North Yorkshire LEP be added as voting members. On the Governance and Audit Committee, the Conservative nominee is Matthew Robinson, and the leader of the opposition group on the Transport Committee is Martin Bolt. So the chairing and deputy chair arrangements, the proposed nominations are Governance and Audit Committee Chair Susan Hinchcliffe with Deputy Chair Tim Swift, Business Investment Panel Chair Shabir Pandor, Transport Scrutiny Committee Chair Amanda Parsons-Hulse, Corporate Scrutiny Committee Chair Peter Harrand, Deputy Chair for the Culture, Arts and Creative Industries Committee, LEP Board Member Helen Featherstone. Caroline, are there any further changes that we need to report?
No further changes have been received at this point, Chair. If there are any further ones, we will look to bring those to the July CA meeting.
Excellent, thank you. Can we agree those recommendations, including the appendices and the updated proposals verbally reported? Of course. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Looking through these, on the Transport Committee, it seems to be quite a few people doing the same role on it. Now, obviously, Councillor Hinchcliffe is now down on there as chair, which I have no problem with at all. Susan is very passionate about transport. But then we have a lead member, and then we have an active travel. So I'm presuming the lead member is a deputy chair now, and then we have a deputy chair. And what the difference in all the roles are, because it looks quite complicated. And given we're going to be doing a review of Transport Committee, why are we changing it now rather than after the review takes place in a few months' time?
I think that's a valid question, and Caroline can talk us through that.
Thank you, Chair. If I start with that, the proposals here are interim proposals for the Transport Committee, recognising the review that the Combined Authority agreed a little while ago. I think it is correct that the lead member for public transport will also take on the deputy chair role for the committee. I think the portfolios here are in recognition of the significant amount of work and the pace in which the committee needs to work in this area. So is designed to actually bring that breadth of responsibility, not so much for the purpose of the meeting itself, but a lot of this is in terms of the activity that goes on outside the meetings and the working groups and the collaboration that takes place. So it may be that Ben wants to add to that, but hopefully that's helpful to you, Councillor Poulsen.
Thank you, Caroline. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point to add to that which Caroline's already made, which is that in effect, this is a model that brings about least change and disruption while the review is underway. So it allows the essential business of the Transport Committee to carry on without disrupting that, given the capacity work that needs to be undertaken.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any other comments? Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. On that basis, and as the report said that the review will be taken expeditiously, when can we expect an outcome for the review?
Caroline, you have the dates for that.
My understanding is that the review will be conducted late summer, early autumn, to be brought back to the Combined Authority, either ideally at its September meeting, but given the amount of, I suppose, collaboration and engagement that's required, it could be the following meeting, but that sort of order. And it is, I suppose, for clarity, it is an internal review. We are not seeking to externalise this. It's a very focused review.
Thank you, Caroline. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add that we've set out some very high-level objectives and terms of reference for the review in the paper, but it will be our intention to share more details with members of the Combined Authority as the process works through. So you will hear more about this as we develop that and seek your views on it over the summer.
Matthew, you want to come back?
I think that would be welcome, and thanks for that, Ben. And I think that the dates Caroline set out, if it's coming back for September, that's great. October, I think at the latest is fair, given the nature of review. Anything that rumbles on later than that risks the good working of the committee here, so we need to be very clear on it as quickly as possible.
If I might add personally that I'm very pleased that we've got 3 scrutiny committees and that we are one of the most transparent and scrutinised combined authorities in the country, and we always welcome scrutiny and your contribution from opposition members. We are a team, West Yorkshire, and we want the best for our communities. Any other comments? Stuart?
I'm sorry if I've missed something again, but the external review of the Transport Committee, is that formally referred to in the agenda? Because one of the things that the Liberal Democrat group were concerned about was, is it really necessary to bring in outside consultants for something which could quite easily be discussed amongst the groups that are represented here? I appreciate that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority is different to a lot of others in that it does actively involve opposition members, but it's yet to have developed the member management structure to sort out issues like the evolution of the Transport Committee in something that the Combined Authority thinks is appropriate and matches the other committees that have been formed under the mayoralty. And I think that could be something which is done far quicker than the current timetable that has been discussed, but I don't think I've seen formally written. But I could be corrected if you point me to the right point in the agenda.
Thank you, Stuart. My understanding that it isn't external. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. That's right. As Caroline indicated earlier, Councillor Galton, the intention is that this will be an internal review, and we've set out some high-level terms of reference on page 18 and 19 of paper item 7. And as I said, we will then look to expand that and bring papers on this to members.
I'm glad the position has moved, that we've internalised it from the previous discussions. Thank you.
Great stuff. Any further comments? Great. Okay. We can move forward then, and we can agree the recommendations for that item 7. So moving on to item 8. This report seeks approval to delegations to officers and Officer Code of Conduct. There are minor amendments proposed to the arrangements currently in place, and they are highlighted in the appendices if you want to refer to it. Can we approve appendices 1, 2 and 3? Yes, great, thank you. Brilliant. Moving on, item 9. You can see we're moving at speed here because the clock is against us. Item 9, appointment of the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime and arrangements for the PCC functions. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce this item, which is for the Combined Authority to note, which confirms Alison Lowe is now formally appointed as Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. She will start in August, further to the Police and Crime Panel hearing June the 18th, and the arrangements are set out for transparency in the appendices. I'd like to put on record my thanks to Mark Burns-Williamson for the smooth transition for Alison and myself. He's given us 3 months of his time to help us understand the landscape and support our thinking, and has served West Yorkshire with great dignity, and I wish him well in whatever he goes on to do. I would say that I think Alison is going to be a fantastic advocate for our region, and certainly someone as passionate as I am about equality and diversity and inclusion and keeping women and girls safe. And already we've had some really interesting and exciting discussions about our next steps. So I think it's going to be a really interesting journey the next few years. If I can ask members to note those arrangements in the report and appendices, please. Great, thank you. A few nods, lovely. Item 10, the constitutional arrangements. For transparency, the meeting is asked to confirm the Combined Authority's constitutional arrangements for the new municipal year, which aren't considered anywhere else on the agenda. Although there's a significant number of documents, I can confirm that no major amendments are proposed to the documentation previously approved by the Combined Authority. Can I ask the approval of members to the documents contained in appendices 1 to 5? Thank you. Item 11, Combined Authority representation on outside bodies. This is to confirm which Combined Authority members are to represent the Combined Authority on external bodies. The proposed appointments are set out in the appendix. Can we agree the recommendation, please? Thank you. Item 12, Corporate Governance Code and Framework. This item presents the Code of Corporate Governance, which sets out the governance framework in place during the last year, and the annual governance statement, which is the consideration of how well that has operated in the last year. It forms part of the annual accounts for the year ending 30th of March 2021. This code's unchanged from last year, will be reviewed and updated over the coming weeks to reflect the changes that flow from the new arrangements for the mayoral functions that are captured in many of the documents we're approving today. So can we note that the existing Code of Corporate Governance, and can we approve the annual governance statement that forms part of the annual accounts? Thank you so much. Item 13, Members' Allowances Scheme. At this point, if I can hand over, please, to Councillor Lewis, the Deputy Mayor, to chair this item.
Thank you, Chair. And we're on item 13, Member Allowances Scheme. I assume everybody's read their papers thoroughly on this. So if I don't see any questions from anybody, I do see questions.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Just to clarify, I certainly, and I'm sure we all do, want best value for money for taxpayers who obviously are funding allowances, etc., the Combined Authority. It just does seem slightly odd that the people who've probably got the most responsibility and the biggest workload, which are members of the Combined Authority, are the ones who actually get no allowance at all. I just wondered, is there a reason for that? I mean, I know historically it was made up of the leaders of councils, but that's not always the case. There could be members on the Combined Authority who aren't leaders of councils getting other allowances. So is that likely to be reviewed at all in the future? Or is that set in stone?
No plans to review that. Councillor Galton.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. It refers back to my earlier question about the Police and Crime Commissioner, because one of the details I was trying to find was the wage that was going to be apportioned to that role. And I wasn't sure if it was something that was within the governance of this committee or whether it was something that had been delegated to the police and crime panel. But I would have thought that it would be reported here, only because it will be a little bit different to the other members' allowance schemes in that the positions that are represented here are for elected members, whereas the deputy mayor for policing will be an employee, I understand, and therefore subject to different rules. So I just wondered where that would be reported for the information for the members of the combined authority.
Ben, would you like to come in on this point, please?
Thank you, Deputy Chair. I think to answer Stuart's questions as briefly as possible, the allowances to the Deputy Chair are published in the Police and Crime panel papers, but we should have made that clearer, and we'll put a link through to that. We'll also publish it on the Combined Authority's website in due course as well. So those figures are already in the public domain. It's just not that they're just not in these papers, but we'll rectify that. And just to add to the additional your earlier comment about that Councillor Paulson made around leaders and allowances for activity on the Combined Authority. It's actually the order that prevents leaders obtaining any allowance in that respect. So,
thank you. That's very useful. Are there any more questions on this item, please? Take it there aren't. So, are we all happy with it? Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much for chairing that item. Moving on to item 14, the Scrutiny Annual Report. This item presents the report prepared annually by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, summarising the work they've done during the past year. This focused on reviewing the preparations for becoming a mayoral combined authority, including scrutiny arrangements and the transfer of the police and crime functions. Any comment? Yes, if you'd like to go ahead.
Chair, excuse me, yes. Just nothing to add to the report. Just put on record our thanks to Carl, Ed and Angela for what they've done to get us to where we are now, and assure the committee it won't be as short and non-controversial next year.
Thank you, Councillor Harrod. Moving on, can we just get confirmation that we've noted that report? Oh, sorry, Councillor Matthew Robinson.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not going to shout across the room, even one as cavernous as this. The report, very welcome, and Scrutiny's done an incredibly good job and continues to do so. The report says that the committee opted for option 1, but that is not, as I understand it, the option that was chosen. We went for 3 scrutiny committees. I just wondered if there could be a little bit more explanation as to why that was chosen.
Thank you. Caroline? Are you happy to take that one, or Ben? Yeah, yes, thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So you're correct, Councillor Robinson. What the paper probably doesn't elaborate on sufficiently is that the dialogue that occurred then between all the parties involved in that process. I think where the Combined Authority members got to was that in the devolution deal, increasing the relationship and the level of engagement between local authorities and the Combined Authority was felt to be something that the deal could help expand upon and improve. And to that end, the West Yorkshire leaders had a firm commitment that they wanted to see more scrutiny and with more members from the local authorities involved in that scrutiny. That pointed towards having a model with multiple scrutiny committees in much the same way as local authorities do, rather than having it all channeled through a single committee. When Councillor Harron's committee looked at that, that was one of the options that they considered, but the leaders felt that was the option that best enabled the maximum numbers of members to be involved, was more transparent because it involved more meetings, and kind of properly reflected the growth of activity of the combined authority itself. So there could be proper scrutiny of all the activities of the combined authority. So I hope that provides a bit of background, but we can provide more information if that'd be helpful.
Would you like to come back?
Yeah, just one quick supplementary, if that's all right. And will there be a review process of this? Because obviously we need to make sure that this is working. And how will that review process work?
Ben?
Thank you. So we, as you're aware, the combined authority goes through every annual meeting, looks again at these processes. So absolutely, we can build something in. There's nothing currently planned, but we could. Sorry. There is a mini review planned, so I stand corrected. There is something planned.
Are you happy with that?
How is it, as you've just found out that the mini review is planned, Ben, and so how's that mini review work? Is it the end of the annual year? Who's involved in that? How's that intended to work then?
Caroline.
Apologies for cutting across there. The report that went to the combined authority, I think it was either the March or the April report, identified in that the intention of scrutiny committees themselves to carry out a review of how it was working during the year. So the scrutiny chairs, working with the statutory scrutiny officer, will go through that process and look at what's working well, what needs to change, and that report will come back from the scrutiny committees to the CA during the course of the year.
Thank you. And if I could just say yet again another thank you to the officers for setting up this amount of work in readiness for the arrival of the mayor, and certainly some mayors across the country, where Steve Rotherham and Dan Jarvis, two examples where they had nothing in place and an office and an iPad, and at least I arrived with structures in place. So thank you for all your hard work. So can we note the scrutiny annual report? Thank you. Good stuff, thanks. Moving on to item 15, calendar of meetings. This presents the calendar of meetings for this municipal year. Can we approve the calendar of meetings? Thank you very much. And now moving on to more substantive business. Item 16, bus reform next steps. If I could just take a moment just to say a few words around this, because I am hugely pleased to introduce this paper, which sets out the next step to deliver my mayoral pledge to bring buses back into public control, introduce simpler fares, contactless ticketing, and greener buses. So this paper, it starts the process for assessing the need for taking more public control through franchising. As that has to follow a statutory process, it's a long one, but I hope I will be able to make the decision in early 2023. But of course, we want to see better buses now today, don't we? So we're kicking off an enhanced partnership to be established 1st of April 2022. This is going to give us access to government funding, and it'll show how far we can get working in partnership with bus operators. And a big part of this enhanced partnership is the bus service improvement plan, which has to be submitted to government in October. And this report sets out the vision and the objectives to inform a plan which will be presented to the CA October meeting. And finally, in terms of current support to bus operators during the pandemic, as you know, we supported the bus companies during the pandemic with additional government support as well. And the paper updates the CA on the current position and sets out principles for deploying emergency funding for the remainder of the year. And of course, we will continue to pay concessionary payments at pre-pandemic rates as part of that emergency funding. I'm assuming there will be interest in this item, and there will be many of you who would like to comment. I wonder if I could start the discussion by bringing in Councillor Hinchcliffe in your role as the chair of the Transport Committee, if you'd like to make any comments on where we are with this, with buses at the moment.
Thank you, Tracy. No, I'm really pleased that so soon after becoming mayor, you've managed to do that with all of us, because it's something that public have really been crying out for. And of course, as you say, it's not just about the future, but it's about the here and now. People need better services now and have been crying out for that for a long time. Let's be aware, though, of course, that to get better services, we need better funding for buses. And that does require a national solution to funding transport equitably and properly across the nation, so we can actually steam forward with our economy and economic recovery that we need so badly.
Thank you. And Councillor Pandor?
Thank you, Chair, and completely agree with what Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe has just said. Also, a big thank you for the many hundreds of emails that we've received over the last few weeks. I'm sure I've responded to all of them, but if I haven't, my apologies, but please let me know and I will make sure that you all get a response. We need to carry on making sure that we lobby government the best we can. We have to make sure that we carry on in terms of what we're doing, because the bottom line is we need to make sure that the service users get the best deal. And in terms of the way I look at it is, whatever partnership we come out with has got to have certain key criteria, key elements, in terms of making sure that taxpayers get the best value for money, because that's the bottom line for myself. Service users, you've heard the phrase that you're waiting for a bus and 5 come at once. But we want to make sure that buses come on the right time at the right place and make sure they service everybody, especially the community that are hard to reach in terms of both social and transport links that we need to make sure that they need to address. Climate emergency also a massive issue, because unless you get a good transport system, you won't get people out of the cars. And we need to make sure that we aspire to making sure that we actually become one of the greenest combined authorities in the country at a pace. And also the final thing is making sure that the workers' rights are actually maintained, because there's many hundreds, if not thousands of people working within the transport sector, from bus drivers to the back office staff. We need to make sure that whatever we do, their workers' rights are protected, the conditions are protected. So a lot of work to do, and we need to actually think carefully what is the best solution. And I understand that there's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions that are out there. We understand them as leaders because we come across it on a daily basis. But at the same time, we don't want to rush into this too fast, and make sure that whatever partnership model we come up with is the best in terms of the 4 elements I just highlighted. So thank you very much, Chair.
Excellent comments, thank you. And if I could just put on record my gratitude to the leaders across the Combined Authority for absolutely understanding and wanting this solution, and working with me and the officers to make sure that we move swiftly. And I'd like to also thank Dave Pearson and his team for working so closely with me on this, and the trade union movement for supporting us in our ambitions to get buses back into public control, but obviously delivering better services in the here and now for the people that we serve. And connectivity is absolutely vital. We need a joined up transport network, and there's a lot to do, but I know with the support and with the passion of the leaders that we can get that done. And I'm very excited about the future for West Yorkshire. And it can't be that you use a bus because you don't have a car. It has to be your first choice, and that's what we are determined to do, to make it cleaner, greener, that tap in, tap out, that works for London and should definitely be able to work for us. And we will be hopefully travelling at a swift pace, being able to learn from mistakes and solutions from other mayoral combined authorities around the country. So I know that we have an ambition to work fast, but I take Councillor Pandor's caution that we need to also get it right. So thank you for those comments. Yes, if we have one more comment, thank you. Councillor, I'm so sorry, Poulsen. Sorry, Councillor Poulsen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the process of this, we have to go into an enhanced partnership first. We hope that is very successful, and then it is reviewed. I understand then that has to go out for a public consultation. Given your opening remarks saying, you know, we're going to go for the franchise and we're going to take over the buses, what happens if the public actually come back and say, we're really happy with what we've got within our enhanced partnership, it's working really well, we're getting good value for money, yet you're saying we want to throw millions and millions then at going into the franchise that may not be the best thing for West Yorkshire?
Thank you, Councillor Paulson. I would say that the consultation is absolutely vital. And at the moment, the consultation is reaching 10% of the population, predominantly white men engaged in that consultation. I'm determined to have a transparent and wider reaching consultation, which is why I'm setting up a roadshow, Tell Tracy. And it will be Tell Tracy about your views on transport, on policing, on housing. But absolutely, you are right. We will listen to the public. But I would suggest we are where we are now with our desire for this because we've listened to the public. And when I certainly reaching out to on social media, what are your experiences of your bus service? We know that the network is broken. The government know this. The Conservative government are very aware of it, which is why they've developed their Better Buses scheme and opened these opportunities for funding. But we will watch this space at how that goes. Obviously, I'm not going to say we're absolutely 100% franchising tomorrow because we're in a process. We have to investigate all avenues. There will be many months of legal investigation and consultation, and that due and proper process is appropriate, and that's what I will be following. But I don't know if others, Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, on that point, I think you make sensible judgments based on the available evidence, don't you? And I don't think there is any part of the country so far that feels that negotiations around partnerships, whether they're the previous structure of partnership or start to develop enhanced partnerships, have successfully delivered all the improvements and public control that we would want to see over bus services. So it seems to me it's a reasonable assumption to say that whilst pursuing an enhanced partnership now to give us some greater influence from 2022 is the right thing to do, it's unlikely based on the available evidence that it will deliver all of the aspirations that are set out in here. And I think you only have to look at the difficulties that have been encountered to date, both in West Yorkshire and more widely, for example, in trying to get existing bus operators to agree to a single ticketing scheme, to see the scale of the challenge about that. So it seems to me this twin track approach is reasonable. Perhaps the bus operators will surprise us with what they'll agree to in terms of an enhanced partnership, but we'll have to see how that one goes. Other than that, Chair, I just wanted to pick up 2 points from the report also, which is about the immediate funding to support recovery of bus fares, which is dealt with in 221 and 222. And that's the funding from September to March, and the question of whether that will continue to be provided directly to the operators or whether that will be handed through the Transport Authority. And I wondered if we'd had any further indications on government's thinking on this one, and if they are still thinking of doing it directly to the operators rather than giving us that extra influence, what steps might be open to take to us to try and lobby on that one. Thank you.
Dave, do you want to take that one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We are awaiting a full sort of statement and details from government on the funding that will. We expect this arrangement to take place in September and run through until the end of March, so the remainder of the financial year. The verbal indications from DfT officials, and we haven't had anything in writing on this yet, is that as they have done throughout the pandemic, payments will be made direct to bus operators, and their rationale being that they have a mechanism, an administration process there. The big difference that we have been sort of pressing DfT officials for is that under this arrangement, bus operators will need to get, as it were, a counter signature from the local transport authority so that we can understand the value of the money they're drawing down in this process, but also if the bus operators are not complying with conditions which, again, as a combined authority and transport authority, we've had input into, then we could have the right to veto on that payment. So to a certain extent, it gives a little bit more influence than we've had so far. It doesn't take us all the way to a devolved arrangement, but it is a little bit of a halfway house, I think, is where we're going. But we expect to get the detail of that possibly in the next week or two. And as set out in the report, I think we'll probably be coming back to the July meeting to explain this a little bit more fully. I think what we should identify the fact is, at the moment, bus services are carrying about 60% of the passengers who normally carry. So there's about 40% funding gap. And to a certain extent, we do need to manage the process over the remainder of the financial year to basically protect the network we've got, and to use that funding as in the most effective way as possible, and also to use it as a leverage in terms of getting the right behaviours from bus operators, not just in the current financial year, but in the process that follows.
Thank you. Going to Matthew, then Stuart, and then Susan and Roger. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. To come back to the franchising, and Dave may be able to answer some of the questions on this. I've had conversations with the Better Bus campaign, as well, as you would imagine, because we did through the mayoral election. And I think there's a frustration from some of them, because some of them maybe thought that this would happen more quickly than it could do. But I accept that there's a process we have to go through here. The report says that it's £5 to £7 million to arrive at a decision. My understanding is that Manchester, to franchise their buses, the final quote is £130 million. Do we have any idea of what the number will be for West Yorkshire?
Dave?
Yes, I think we need to separate two elements of this process. So there's the costs of moving into moving through the various franchising processes that set out in the report. Now, Manchester have deployed funding into that, and then when they and to a certain extent they have paid the price of being the early adopters, as it were, in this process, because obviously they've had to commission quite a lot of detailed expert advice, legal advice, etc., to get to that position. To an extent, we have the benefit of following them, so we have actually commissioned some advice from some of the similar advisors that the Manchester have. So we've probably shortened the timescale a little, as we set out in the report, as well as shorten the costs. But I think what we should also reflect on is the 135.5 million that was announced in Manchester in April. Is very much the cost of the next stage, and that's very much looking at what Manchester are actually contributing, not just to the process of franchising, but their first stage of enhancing services, and we're some way off that stage to be able to put a figure on that at the moment.
Thank you very much, Dave. And just to reiterate that this isn't our process of our choosing; it's the government's time frame that we have to conform with. Stuart.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Well, the Liberal Democrat group would appreciate you holding fast to your commitment to pursuing franchising powers, because after all, you were voted on that ticket, and you therefore have a mandate to pursue it. And to argue that, oh, well, let's wait and see what people think. We've just been through a whole electoral process to understand what people think. And I didn't find one single person that was happy with the arrangement that we currently have with bus operators. And it primarily boils down to the fact that they are multinational organizations who have their own business model, and the ability to make sure that their delivery of their bus services are accountable on a local footprint is non-existent at the moment. And in terms of that expectation that the public might somehow all of a sudden rally behind their bus companies, I really do think you're in cloud cuckoo land. I really do. Let's just think of it from a different perspective. All that we're asking for is the same powers as they have in London. In London, they have twice the amount of bus patronage. If we're serious about the climate change emergency and trying to have less emissions, we need to get people onto buses. And that is the proven model to enable it to happen. And if you're so confident as a party that bus companies can just deliver benefits on their own, why don't you propose in the London area that they revert to the powers that we've got here in West Yorkshire? because I think that would go down like a lead balloon for the people of London, because they appreciate that the control over those services and the accountability that there is for bus companies to deliver locally associated routes, and the frequency that you need, and more importantly, the affordability that you need. Those powers are needed. And the kind of leverage that we've got at the moment with the COVID relief funding on bus operators is something that we need to have on a permanent basis. And that is what this is for. And actually, most people, I think, would be frustrated at the rate of progress that we're allowed to take thanks to the government's own rules, which, as usual, favour giving the benefit of the doubt to private interest over public interest. So I hope that the Mayor really does drive this forward.
Always good to have a consensus. Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think we need to be honest with the public about what we are allowed to do and not allowed to do. As the Mayor outlined, there is a legal process that everything has to go through. She can't suddenly jump to a decision without going through that process. And I think it's unfair to try and make her do that, because actually she would be acting without the law, and that we can't do that. She can't do that. So there is a process to go through. It takes years. Every option has to be properly considered before a decision can be made. And I think the public would expect us to do that. To look at all the options and make the right decision. So I think, you know, the Mayor is absolutely the right thing. We've done absolutely the right thing in trying to move as quickly as possible to get buses back into public control, so they're better bus services. What it is all about is getting a better bus service for the people that we represent. And just bearing that in mind, I'll just follow on from the comment that Councillor Swift made about where is the money being spent from. And once again, it's been spent from Westminster. You've got people in Westminster spending money on a bus going from Keighley to Bradford. And that should, honestly, that decision needs to be made up here. And I get very frustrated that that is still made in Westminster when it should be up here. And that really set me to thinking really about the William Shapps review about devolution of transport to the regions on rail transport, and that's obviously a better direction of travel for us. And I think we'd all agree that we want to have more control over all our public transport, but getting rail up here would be fantastic, and that's a real good start. But I think it would be worth having that as an agenda item in, I don't know if the next meeting is the most appropriate or the one after that. But I think it'd be good for all of us to have a look at that and see what more we need government to do to accelerate that, because that's the kind of model we want to see: devolution, power to the people, nearest the people who we represent. And I think that leads to better governance. So let's all push for that.
Thank you for that. I absolutely agree, and certainly we can make that an agenda item. And that strategic partnership with GB Rail, I think, is something that I've been raising with ministers as well, so that we do get more agency and more decision-making powers around where we want our rail tracks to go. And certainly Northern Powerhouse Rail is our top item agenda at the moment. Roger.
Thank you, Chair. I was just reflecting, listening to all of the colleagues' comments. It's about 32 years ago I found myself advising in a different life the then West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Authority on the sale of Yorkshire Rider to a management-led ESOP. So funny how things go around. And interestingly, having the privilege of being part of the expert challenge for the Williams Rail Review, I think the common ground for all of this is the triangle of interest, making it as best as we can for passengers, for all of us. Secondly, to do it in a way that's optimal for the taxpayer, which is all of us. And thirdly, importantly, making sure that we do the right deal by the planet. So I'm happy to give support. As regards the detail of the process and the time frame, it's not for me to comment on, but just to add those comments for what they're worth.
And they are worth a great deal, and certainly that commitment to the planet. This is why everybody is focused on buses, because if we get greener buses and people out of their cars, we will be heading in some way to hit our zero carbon emissions target of 2038. And that's certainly something I know that is a view held by most people in this room, that has got to be a priority, not just for us now, for jobs and for our region, but for the future and our children's future. Matthew, you want to come back in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, like a good West Yorkshire bus, we've gone around the houses, but I'm not sure we've got where I want to be. The question I asked of Dave was what the cost would be. At the end, what we know is that it's going to cost 5 to 7 million, but we don't have an idea, I'm hearing, of what the cost would be to take the buses back into public ownership. There's also a conversation about enhanced partnership here. Some people may not enter that in the best faith and hope that enhanced partnership will work. That's what I'm hearing. Some will hope that it will fail and actually we'll have to go down a franchise model. That's fair enough. That's a political decision, but we should enter enhanced partnership with a hope that it will succeed as opposed to a hope that it will fail. A final question that I hope Dave can add some meat on as well is, when we review this, will this take account of the progress that we're making towards a mass transit system in West Yorkshire as well? Because I think that's really important and something that I would hope that we all agree on. A mass transit system is something we want to see.
Can I just say, enhanced partnerships, I want it to work because I want buses to be better now for the public and for the people who need them. When it comes to costs, there is it's not laid out exactly how much every stage is going to cost, but I do know that the people of West Yorkshire want value for money, absolutely, and that's why they don't think the bus network works for them, because it's costly, and it when you have to have 2 or 3 bus journeys and you're paying again and again, you're not getting value for money. And they want us as their leaders to give them options that have value for money as a top priority. And certainly that will be something that's at the front and centre of our minds when we're making decisions about next steps. But Dave, do you want to just clarify?
Yes, just on Councillor Robinson's question around mass transit, and you members will recall that we consulted extensively earlier in the year on a connectivity strategy. And that connectivity strategy sort of looked at how the transport network in West Yorkshire could be built in layers, if you like, and the bus being very much what the base layer, if you want to think of it that way, in terms of how people connect. And obviously, as we add further modes in terms of mass transit, then looking to make sure it's all integrated, so it all sort of knits together is a key part of the connectivity strategy that the Combined Authority's been developing, and you as members of the Combined Authority have overseen. So I think there's very much the work we do with buses very much linked to the work we do in mass transit, and the two things will absolutely need to knit together in terms of an integrated transport network. So it's, I would assure members that we would not be doing these two things in isolation.
Thank you. I'm unfortunately aware of time, and we can't be in this building for health and safety beyond our scheduled finish time. So are we all content to agree the recommendations from section 10? Approve the publication of the notice to prepare an assessment for the need for a franchising scheme. Number 2, approve the publication of the notice of intent for the enhanced partnership. Number 3, note the government's requirement for the bus service improvement plan and endorse the vision and the objectives of the plan. And number 4, endorse the approach to the deployment of emergency funding for bus services for the remainder of 2021-22 to set out in this report pending further guidance from the government. Please indicate. Thank you. Moving on to item 17, West Yorkshire Investment.
Chair, sorry, it's just like,
Go ahead.
There is a voting system on the console, if it makes it easier for you to see how people are indicating, that we could use.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Let's go back to that vote and make a very strong indication. Susan. I'm not sure we need to bring technology into this. If everybody just raises their hand if they approve, and then we will be able to see very clearly. Approved. Hands against. And abstain. 2 abstentions.
2 abstentions.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Thank you. We had to be old school there, but never mind. Item 17, West Yorkshire Investment Strategy. This paper asks for combined authority endorsement of the West Yorkshire Investment Strategy. It's a government requirement, but important for us as it sets out our priorities to guide us how we spend gain share and other funds that form part of this investment fund. I know that you've discussed this before in March. I wasn't with you then when you discussed it. And this paper sets out the strategy updated in the light of my pledges for your agreement. It might be worth noting that the West Yorkshire Investment Strategy sets out our high-level priorities for investment and also the criteria for assessing programmes and projects in the future. Reducing inequality is a cross-cutting theme within the priorities, and to ensure the investments made across the region support equality and diversity. If I may just draw your attention to 6 areas of the strategy. 1, good jobs, resilient businesses. 2, skills and training for people. 3, creating great places and accelerated infrastructure. 4, tackling climate emergency and environmental sustainability. 5, future transport. And 6, culture and the creative industries. We're not seeking any specific approvals for projects or programs at this time, but it's about the framework that will be used in making these decisions. Are we content with these recommendations? Yeah. If I may, Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of clarification questions, and forgive the detailed aspects of this. On page 23, 523 of the papers, it refers to the various funds that are going to go into the single investment fund. And I particularly wanted to just clarify under the heading ring fence for a set purpose, but flexibility in deployment, and in particular the Growing Places Fund. Just to make sure my understanding is either incorrect or, as I believe it to be, that is a fund, once the return of capital, there are no set purposes for that fund, but I wanted to just check that. And the second one, under the third heading, ring fence for a set purpose and projects are predetermined, that the transport fund that was agreed with government in connection with the local growth fund some years ago, which I had some involvement with, was a 20-year fund, having obviously already invested 6 years of that. Just to clarify that actually it still has 14 years to run rather than 10 as is in the paper. As I say, it may be my misunderstanding or recollection of detail, but I just thought it would be helpful to colleagues to have that precision, Chair.
Thank you, Roger, for the scrutiny. Ben?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roger, for those questions. I think on the 2 points you raise, on the Growing Places Fund, there is an active conversation with government about how far some of the restrictions that were placed on the original fund carry through, even though in effect the funds have been returned, and that applies both to the remit and scope of the fund, but also on the flexibility between capital and revenue. So that's an ongoing conversation. We can provide an update on that in due course. On the transport fund, I need to go away and check that. I think you are correct. I know there were moves to try and deliver the programme as rapidly as possible, but I'll come back with a note to members about what the kind of the end point for that programme.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Chair. I do recall it was a £600 million fund based on 30 million for 20 years. That's, and forgive me, it's the accountant in me remembers the numbers. Thank you.
Always useful. Any further comments? Matthew, then Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. In discussion and a briefing ahead of this report, it was really useful. I think there's a lot of good, and a lot of good will come from it. It would be useful for the combined authority, and I think for scrutiny functions in the future, to see a bit of a bank statement of the gain share. So where the gain share is and where it's being spent and how it's being reported back. That will really help for transparency and for the combined authority to know just where that money's going.
We can do that, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it was just to endorse that point, because I was a little bit confused on the same page that Roger pointed out in 523, because it talks about the £38 million a year, which has traditionally been called gain share. being available and flexible for use. But further down under the ring-fenced element, it talks about the Transport Fund gain share, which is £30 million for the next 10 years, which implies that quite a lot of the £38 million is tied up and therefore not flexible. So there's a little bit of cross-reporting there, unless I'm missing something.
Ben.
Chair, thank you. Apologies if there's any confusion, and maybe we need to think carefully about how we use the term gain share. Essentially, the £38 million for 30 years is the money that came from the devolution deal. That is entirely separate to the Transport Fund gain share. That terminology reflects back to the original devolution and growth deal that was done by the Combined Authority and the LEP in before I started, 2014, where some of the flexibilities were provided to Leeds City Region at that time.
And can you please clarify, hasn't some of the £38 million gain share been committed to transport schemes in the previous financial year of the £38 million? And that might what has caused some of that confusion?
So as part of the Combined Authority papers over the course of last year, two aspects of the £38 million gain share have been committed. One was the funds that were committed in last year's gain share towards COVID economic recovery, and allocations were made to skills, to employment, and to entrepreneurial activity. And the second was that as part of the devolution deal, the Transforming Cities Fund, so not Transport Fund, but Transforming Cities Fund, the deal resulted in £317 million from government. That did not meet all of the aspirations that the 5 local authorities and the Combined Authority had for all the schemes that were within the Transforming Cities Fund programme. So commitments were made that any additional funding would be brought from the gain share. But that is not yet specific allocations made to specific projects, but that commitment exists.
If I may say, this does raise a question and query that we will take away that really does lay out where the money is coming from, what's been pre-allocated, etc. I think it's good to have that clarity, and I appreciate you raising it. So just moving on, are we, any other further thoughts? Are we happy to move on and to note item 17? Great stuff. So 18. Is the initial funding priorities. So following the approval of West Yorkshire Investment Strategy, this item is to approve in principle funding from gain share to enable development work to be done in key priority areas, namely bus, culture, good work standards and skills, which aligns to my pledges and starts us getting to work immediately on their delivery. And this funding will work up the propositions to come to future meetings. So the key points very quickly: 500,000 to support the scheme development relating to culture and the creative industries. £1 million initial resources to undertake assessment relating to bus franchising, 600,000 over 3 years to develop a good work standard following approval of the Combined Authority Inclusive Growth Framework, and my focus on inclusion and supporting business. 500,000 to support the scheme development relating to employment and skills for 16 to 30-year-olds, with a focus on those emerging sectors such as green and digital. Are there any further comments on these allocations? No, thank you. So are we content to approve this development funding? Thank you so much. Terrific. So moving on to item 19, capital spending and project approvals. Now, the report provides details of 5 schemes that are recommended to the Combined Authority for progression through the assurance process. So for this item, I'd like to hand over to Roger Marsh to talk members through this paper. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Chair. And in the absence of Councillor Jeffrey, I'm pleased to just report back on the 2 investment committee meetings that have looked in detail at these funding requests and recommending that the combined authority approves their progression. They are set out in detail in the papers, and in the interest of time, I wasn't planning to go through them line by line, but should colleagues have any detailed questions, I will look at first instance to Melanie Corcoran and others to help address those questions. In overall terms, as it's been said, there are 4 schemes and also a progression on the Transforming Cities Fund programme review to get approval today. Those 4 schemes in total add up to something a little over £17.6 million of funding, of which a shade under 15 million will be provided by the combined authority. And to date, today, the approval is sought for the expenditure of £6.75 million across those 4 projects. As I said, in addition, there is a fifth request for approval regarding the Transforming Cities Fund programme review for 2021. And as I said, if there's detailed questions on that, I'll go to Melanie to answer those. And I'm not sure there's any need for me to go in any further detail, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Any questions on the capital spending and project approvals? Yes, Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. It would be useful when this has been reported back to know what the local feedback from ward members is on some of these schemes as well. And the reason I ask about that is because the demand responsive transport item that's on there, the second phase of it comes into my ward. And I was unaware that this was happening, and I hadn't got a clue that this was going to be taking place. Actually, I think I'm a big fan of demand responsive transport. I think we could go even further with it and find better value for money. So having some of those conversations would be useful, and for the combined authority, and give us a bit of a steer on this. And I'd welcome a conversation about demand responsive transport too.
Susan, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously this is a partnership, isn't it, between combined authority and the local council. So really what we don't want is dual conversations between combined authority staff and council staff about the same thing. So I've always preferred it to go through my authority. We're talking to local members. You might want to do the same yourself. Obviously, there's a conversation to have with James about if it's not been communicated right, perhaps. But what I don't want is to double up those conversations and combined authority doing consultation about the same conversations with the same people that the council's also doing. So just from a streamlining point of view, I don't think the combined authority can be held responsible for that bit. It's my thought, really.
I'm just going to go to Dave, who might give you a bit more information on DRT.
Just to reassure Councillor Robinson, we have in hand to sort of a consultation stakeholder engagement event, which local ward members will be party to basically go through the detail of this. So it's part of the sort of process. Now we've got the approval to go ahead, that we'll start engaging locally in terms of the finer points of the service design.
Thank you. Do you know when that might be, Dave?
It'll probably be July or August, because we're at that particular stage with this now.
That's helpful. Thank you. Matthew, did you want to come back?
Yeah, I think that would be useful. It was sort of buried away on page 625, so it was worth me raising it. But I think the demand responsive transport has a real opportunity for the combined authority in getting this right, and getting this right, not just looking at this particular scheme, and I don't wish to be parochial, we can really serve some communities that are faced with deprivation, but rural communities as well, and make this really work. So I'm keen to find out more.
Great stuff. You might find yourself leading on that. Get yourself a job there. But absolutely, we're all in agreement that that's one of the ways that we can reach those more further away communities, rural communities in particular, where you can't have a bus at every corner for everyone, and that we can maybe make a life easier for them. So can I ask if we are all content on these recommendations? Thank you. Yeah, great stuff. Okay, so final item, minutes for information. I'd just like to thank everybody for making my first ever chairing of the Combined Authority so straightforward and such a pleasure. And thank you for your contributions. And I know that going forward, we will be spending more time together working through all the issues that we've raised and an opportunity to deliver for the people of West Yorkshire. If I can just remind members of the next date of the meeting, 29th of July, and I'd like to formally close this meeting. Thank you all for attending.